But I want to thank you guys for letting me talk. When Mark asked me to do this, I said, Mark, I don't know if I really feel comfortable doing it. There's a lot of smart people at this thing, and a lot of people have been working on this for a long time, a lot of technical knowledge in there. I don't really know if I'm, up to it. He goes, oh, no. We just need somebody to throw out some goofy opinions and wild-ass conjecture. I said, I got that covered. But a little bit about my background in the quail world. When I got out of graduate school, I was older than most students. I was 32, had done a lot of other things. But I went to work for Smurfit Stone Container Corporation, a Fortune 500 pulp and paper company that Stone Container did not own any land. We were feeding pulp mills primarily with timber from non-industrial private lands. We had a program where if landowners sold us timber, we would incorporate wildlife things into their timber harvest and actually write management plans for them. And I worked with private landowners from Louisiana to Virginia through the coastal plain, working on wildlife management as part of their timber management. And they all wanted wildlife, which means deer and turkeys. Had one guy that wanted fence lizards and one guy that wanted American redstarts. So that was kind of neat. Everybody kind of wanted quail, but had kind of given up on them. But I had a few that actually had birds. But I got to see a lot of what works and what doesn't. I got to see what a lot of you people have been frustrated with. You got the 50-acre landowner. Half of it is woods, the other half is cow pasture. They show you the bicolor hedgerow they planted, and they haven't seen a quail yet. But we got to do something about coyotes. Okay, so I know about that. I've been with a landowner that took me to his barn. He showed me the 34 sets of owl and hawk talons he had, tacked to the side of the barn, trying to fix his quail issues. So I've done a lot of that, but I also saw some landowners doing some really unique things and neat things that worked. Then I went to work managing Groton Plantation, and Groton is situated sort of directly halfway between Augusta and Savannah on the South Carolina side of the Savannah River. It's got 24 miles of frontage on the Savannah River, and one family's owned it since 1906. 23,000 acres, a beautiful piece of heaven, 60 colonies of red-cockaded woodpeckers, bald eagles, swallowtail kites, wood storks, painted buntings, and quail. And I got hired as the manager there right when they had recommitted themselves to restoring the quail population. And if you're familiar with Walter Rosine's book about quail, about a third of the content for Rosine's book on quail came from Groton Plantation. And he dedicated that book to Robert Winthrop and Robert Gaylord, who were the main guys there on the place. But the year before I got there, they were averaging 0.9 coveys per hour of wild birds. And they hunt in a very traditional manner, off horseback and off of jeeps, but they also hunt singles between covey rises, okay? The year after I left, we were up to 4 coveys an hour. And again, that included hunting singles between covey rises, which drove me insane. I'd be with them on a hunt, and we'd get a covey up, and they'd fly, okay, we're going to go get these singles. I said, why don't we just go get another covey? Because in my mind, I'm competing against the Thomasville and Albany, Georgia crowd. You'll get 12 coveys an hour. Yeah, but they're hunting at 30 miles an hour, and they don't even look at singles. But it showed me, but we got very aggressive. I basically had a bottomless pit for a budget. We were trapping, feeding, doing everything you do. I spent $500,000 on herbicide. We were burning everything. We cut a lot of timber in a 2-year period, a lot of timber, a lot of hardwood removal, mid-story removal. But I saw if you get really aggressive and you've got the resources, it can be done. Well, I left there, went to work for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and in the second year of that, I was on my 3rd CEO at the organization. And the 3rd one decided to exile me out of Montana back to Appalachia where I spoke the language. And so I moved to Kentucky to set up the Elk Foundation's conservation sort of vision and everything we're going to do in the Appalachian chain. We'd already put elk in western North Carolina, in Tennessee, and in Kentucky. The Kentucky herd, they stocked 1,500 elk over about a 5-year period. As of today, there's somewhere between 13,000 and 16,000 elk, wild elk running around East Kentucky. But when I took that on, I saw immediately that if elk were going to have a real big future in the Appalachian chain, it was going to be on mine lands. Because those landscapes provided the food, provided the cover, and the tracts of land were big enough that elk wouldn't get in trouble every day. they're kind of like black bears. They're kind of cool to have around, but when they get around people, they get in trouble. So in 2004, I joined the Kentucky Coal Association because, you know, if I'm going to work with this industry, you got to immerse yourself in it and learn their business to try to figure out how you can make my world is here, your world is here, what can we do together? And I started learning the coal business, and it's a fascinating world. One thing I learned that the coal industry has done, sort of like the forest products industry, they've held together these big landscapes of land, big chunks of land, where you can work with one owner and actually have an impact. You're not doing the 250-acre landowners. You got one company, one landowner that controls several thousand acres at a time. And also, some of these surface mines, like it or not, they're big enough to where you could get landscape habitat management large enough to do things for grassland birds, to do things for quail, or to do things for whatever you wanted to do it for. So in 2005, I wrote up a concept paper on something I thought we could do with the coal industry. And if you're familiar with the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, you guys in here know what SFI is? Okay. I was real involved in SFI for a long time. And in 2005, I wrote up a document saying, you know, we need an SFI for the coal industry. Sort of a sustainability program, long-term program for that. For whatever reason, the Elk Foundation, we never did do it. So at the end of 2009, me and two other guys said, let's give this thing a shot. And so I quit the Elk Foundation. They provided the first year's worth of money, and we're off and running. So we created what we're calling the Mine Land Stewardship Initiative, which is using SFI as a model. And it's a program of voluntary performance measures for the coal industry to use in the coal mining process and the restoration process, with a focus on conserving wildlife and wildlife habitat. It's to get performance and get things done extra that are not covered in regulation. And that's kind of hard to do because they are regulated out the wazoo. I think the current count is 22 agencies you have to deal with, in Kentucky at least, to mine coal. And a lot of them have overlapping responsibilities. It's a tough world. But we created this Mine Land Stewardship Initiative. The companies that are involved in it have been involved from the beginning. Alpha Natural Resources, John Paul Jones back there. Alpha was one of the, I guess, the second company to jump in. Got Tico Coal back there, Chris Stanley. Tico came on board. We've got Arch Coal on board, Patriot Coal, Natural Resource Partners, which is not a mining company, but they're a huge mineral reserve owner and a huge landowner. We got two utilities on board, Duke Energy and American Electric Power. They're the two biggest coal-burning utilities in the United States. But we spent almost 3 years now developing these performance measures to improve wildlife habitat. Before we started writing any of it, we really aggressively went after input from the wildlife conservation community, asking them, if you had a top 10 list of things you wanted the mining industry to do to improve wildlife habitat or to do better on wildlife, what would it be? The National Bobwhite NBCI provided input. Don McKenzie, we've been talking about this for a couple of years now. We got input from over 20 organizations, including a couple of state wildlife federations, the Nature Conservancy, Wildlife Management Institute, Conservation Fund, TRCP, QDMA, Turkey Federation, Elk Foundation, American Chestnut Foundation, Wildlife Habitat Council, Coal Country Bee Works, a lady that does honeybee restoration and works on pollinators. So we really hit a broad spectrum of organizations. And we came up with a top 10 out of that. And that culminated in a 2-day workshop in January of 2012 where all these wildlife groups were here with representatives from the coal industry that represented over 90% of U.S. coal production were in the room. And for 2 days we talked about what we want to do and try to improve things. And it was fascinating. And I organized that, and Mark, I feel for you because you organize this thing, and these things they absolutely wear you out, and it's exhausting, but it was really rewarding. We sat there for 2 days, and we had other utilities there as well. But it was very, very productive. So then we started writing the performance measures. But the one thing that came out on top that the wildlife community really asked for was asking the coal industry to engage in some long-term and specific conservation planning, landscape scale planning. If you're going to be mining coal in central Appalachia or Alabama or in southern Illinois, do some planning so when you mine it and you reclaim it, it fits into some sort of plan, landscape plan that meets regional wildlife conservation objectives, but also the wants and needs of the people that live close to the mine. That's something that really doesn't exist in the regulatory environment, is planning. And it's not because anybody didn't want to do it, it just hasn't been part of the culture. Mining is regulated primarily, governed by SMCRA, the Surface Mine Controlled Reclamation Act, was written in the 70s. And as specific as it gets on planning is that you have to pick a post-mining land use of reforestation, hayland, pasture land, agriculture, a couple other things. But one is wildlife habitat. You can have a post-mining land use of wildlife habitat. And being a wildlife biologist has done a lot of land consulting. Okay, what does that mean? Because I've been around these mines long enough that I know, given the right plan and resources, you can reclaim a coal mine to make habitat for bullfrogs and wood ducks. I can do it for elk and grassland birds. I can do it for quail. I can do it for cerulean warblers and bats. It'll take longer, but you can do it. You can restore habitat for just about anything, but the post-mining land use is wildlife habitat. So that's one thing we're trying to look at is, can we get more species specific or guild specific in mine reclamation and make that blend with the regulatory environment. That's one thing we're trying to achieve with the Mine Land Stewardship Initiative, is to target things. So one reason I wanted to participate in this Mine Lands Committee is to help make more people aware of what's possible on these mine lands. I started spending a lot of time on mine lands in '04 and doing the elk thing, but I'm a bird watcher, and I tell you, I was really kind of shocked by a couple of things. When I first saw some of these mines, you know, at first the visual hit is like, whoa, man, this is a really big landscape. You know, this is kind of looks like Wyoming, and I'm in Kentucky. But then you start hearing prairie warblers and chats and white-eyed vireos and indigo buntings and every sparrow that's imperiled. Then you hear the bobwhites whistling. And some of these sites are not old, they're not warm season grasses and partridge pea. Some of these sites are, you look at it and there's a lot of cerisa out there. There's a lot of fescue, but somebody didn't tell the quail they're not supposed to be there. And they're there. And so for years I've kind of watched this and looked at it and started talking to Don 2 or 3 years ago about, you know, all these different mine sites, you got these quail on, and it's not optimum habitat. It's not what I would consider that great. Some of it is pretty sweet. But I started thinking then, this has been done by accident. Nobody planned to take care of these songbirds. Nobody planned to have quail here. What could we do if we actually planned it? We might completely screw it up, overthink it and all that jazz, but that's led us to where we're at now with this initiative. So that's what we're trying to do. But one question is, so what is the objective on mine reclamation? In 2010, the Office of Surface Mining came out with a proposed rule and a preferred alternative for complete reforestation of every mine site that ever had a forest on it. Now that includes Appalachia, Illinois Basin, anything that historically had trees must be reforested. Okay, if somebody wants to reforest, fine. I'm all for reforestation. I'm talking to ARI I'm talking to some reforestation groups about heading up a Forest Land Wildlife Committee, you know. But they're trying to force something through a regulation that is going to take away a lot of flexibility in what we can do with mine lands. Right now, the way the regulations are written, it's pretty flexible. And if you talk to the regulators, you can do a lot of different things. But that's something that's ongoing and that we're engaged in. But one thing I want to ask the wildlife community to do, whether you're a state biologist or you work for an NGO or whatever, one thing that's really been lacking in the mining industry and the whole dynamic around the coal mining industry, there's been very little what I consider sort of high-level strategic interaction and partnerships between the mining industry and what I call the mainstream wildlife community. In all of the back and forth I've had with all these wildlife conservation groups, I've met one person with one organization that knows anything about coal mining. And it's a guy that works for the Nature Conservancy here in Virginia. Great guy, a guy named Brad Krebs. He's been around it, he's taught himself about it, he knows about it. But the wildlife community really has zero knowledge of what the mining industry is about and how it operates. Concurrently, a lot of people in the mining industry, when they think about wildlife conservation groups, they think about people that are suing them or that are having a campaign to, to stop it, to shut it down. But that engagement hasn't been there. And if you're operating in a state, whether it's Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Alabama, you got lignite mines in Mississippi, Louisiana, and East Texas. All these have opportunities for some really slick wildlife restoration as part of a reclamation plan. And you really got to go out and engage these people because it hasn't happened, and we're losing some enormous opportunities to do some things. So that's what I would ask people to do, and I'm going to do my part to help the coal industry engage more of the wildlife community. It's kind of a long-term thing, but it's something that's been lacking. And one other thing is, this is the first wildlife conference I've been to in about 2.5 years. It's fun. I know a lot of people here, and we have a good time, and it's good. But starting about 2 or 3 years ago, I started going to, I go to energy conferences now. I go to, the Platts Coal Conference in Fort Lauderdale. I go to the National Council of Coal Lessors meeting in Washington, and learning their business and being there. And it's kind of neat because I'm the only wildlife guy there, so everybody thinks I'm really cool, because I'm different. But I actually got on the agenda in Fort Lauderdale at the Platts Conference. The speaker before me is, with Goldman Sachs. The speaker after me was in Detroit Edison. So we're always preaching to the choir about the way things ought to be. And I'm really trying to engage and get into that world by getting in with them. So I would also encourage you, go to these energy conferences, get involved with your coal associations. If you want to have an impact on that world, you got to learn their business. It's a fascinating world. I'm just fascinated by it. The whole energy matrix and the potential for what's going to happen in the next 20 years. There's a consortium of European coal-burning utilities make electricity. I think they're up to 11 utility companies now in Western Europe and the UK. They have brought together a coalition to develop performance measures for the global coal supply. And they're taking on health and safety, labor and wages, social justice, and environmental performance for the global coal supply. That's a big undertaking. But the reason, and it's on their website, they'll tell you why they're doing it. Even though Western Europe is, oh God, they're leading the way in green energy and all this stuff. On their website, they'll say by the year 2050, they're predicting that Western Europe and the UK are going to be burning 35% more coal than they are right now. They said, we're not going to build any nuclear power plants. The guy that leads that coalition, he's based in London, and we swapped emails for almost a year. Then he called me, and we had a good conversation. He said, yes, us Europeans like to wag our finger at the rest of the world and, tell people how they ought to act. He said, but I'm sitting in London right now. It's 4:30 in the afternoon, and it's dark. We're in a weather pattern right now. The wind hasn't blown in 3 weeks. Even if it did blow, I'm sorry, but we're not going to cover the British Isles with windmills. It's the United Kingdom. Solar won't work. It's dark here or it rains all the time. He said our North Sea oil and gas fields are petering out. So we can't supply our electricity with gas. We're sure as hell not going to build a nuclear power plant. And we've already mined all our coal. He said much of Western Europe is coming to this conclusion. And he said, so we're going to buy coal from Colombia, South America, from South Africa, from Indonesia, and from Russia. He said these are places that really have no regulation. They don't do a very pristine job of mining it. So we're developing these standards to try to improve that. We're admitting it's going to happen. You look at the projections for what's going to go on in China. They're going to double their coal consumption. We still got over 300 million people in China that don't have electricity. That's the entire population of the United States, that many people in China that do not have electricity. It's hard to even comprehend. But they're going to have electricity, and they're going to do it with coal. India is the same projection. Over 300 million people in India don't have electricity. They're building a power plant every week in India. Africa has tens of millions of people without electricity. They're doing the same thing. It's concurrently, not just with coal, but you've got other countries finding shale gas. They're finding shale oil. The whole geopolitical landscape is going to go through a lot of shifting in the next 20 years. Us wildlife guys and gals cannot sit back and just say, oh God, I wish it wouldn't happen. If it's going to happen, get engaged. When I started this organization and this initiative, I had people ask me, aren't you concerned about the climate issue? Well, it doesn't really matter. I'm not dealing with the climate issue and carbon. There's enough of the world fighting that fight. I can't add anything to it. I can't take anything away from it. I can't add anything to the fight over whether we should coal mine, whether we should do mountaintop removal, whether we should... that fight is already happening. I can't add anything to it. But while that fight is happening, it's happening every single day. And I see a great need for more people in the wildlife community to get engaged with these companies in a positive, proactive manner and try to get the best conservation outcome possible. We've got to do the same thing with gas. We've got to do the same thing with oil. We can't just depend on people to sue them and try to shut them down, because it's not going to happen. So that's my little soapbox part of the speech. But it's a fascinating world. If it's in your state, try to learn it, get involved in it. I got a little podunk website, www.appalachianwildlife.com. Get in touch with me. But we'd the more we can get the word out, we can. On the quail committee today, it's our first ever meeting. We had a lot of kind of group grope, conversations, and everybody kind of throwing stuff out. But then we picked up a piece of paper where Don McKenzie actually wrote kind of a vision statement and some main points, and hey, this is it. Don, you already did it. But Don's got a real good start on that. It's a great thing we want to do. But one other thing we did come up with is it's not just the future coal mining to think about. There are hundreds of thousands of acres that have already been mined and already been reclaimed. There's some opportunities to work on those lands to try to improve things. NRCS guy was in our meeting today, and one thing we kind of need a farm bill for mine lands. Something to go back and fix what was done in the past with fescue and Cerisa and autumn olive. There's really no program to deal with those properties to try to improve them. But there's tens of thousands of acres of that stuff out there that we can work with, no matter what the future may hold for future mining. But anyway, that's all I got to say. If anybody wants to talk more about it later, get in touch with me. Just thanks for listening to me and not going to sleep. And anyway, thanks a lot.